Many Americans know Harriet Tubman for her courage and sacrifice as conductor of the Underground Railroad. But in reality, few recognize such hero as a Civil War spy and a military leader. In fact, according to the history, Tubman was the first woman to lead a combat regiment during the Civil War, and as a opinion issue this year, U.S. Army officer of the General Council acknowledged her as one of the few women who served as a soldier in the Civil War. Now, here's something quite interesting. When we look at the geopolitical change, and not only this global sense, but domestically, look at what's happening in our nation today. Under Trump administration, it looks like this patriotism is on the rise. But look deeper, it is not. Quite frankly, it's causing a lot more questions among the voters. How do we understand the history today? And why some of the official decisions is causing much greater controversy, especially regarding some of the critical figures for our country. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who's the Dr. Edda Black. Dr. F. Black is a specialist in the transnational history of the West Africa rice, peasant farmers in the pre-colonial Upper Guinea coast, and enslaved laborers on antebellum Lowcountry, South Carolina, and Georgia rice plantation. She's the author of the new book called COMBEE, Harriet Tubman and the Combahee River Raid and the Black Freedom During the Civil War. Dr. Black, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you, Will. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, Dr. Black, again, when I discovered you, because this article that you co-authored, and which is entitled, actually, Secretary Hegseth, Harriet Tubman was a war hero. Now, Dr. Black, let's talk about Harriet Tubman and also what motivated you to co-author this amazing piece. Should I say it's a critical piece? Because in the story that you mentioned, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, it's wrong to consider stripping Tubman's name from the USNS Harriet Tubman. Walk us through what happened and why this is so important and critical for our nation today. Your thoughts?
So, I've been sitting back probably since March, watching as the new Trump administration came into office and kind of got settled in their positions. And the way that various honors and histories and of women, people of color, members of the LGBTQIA community have been rolled back. And Harriet Tubman is one example. She's the example I, of course, know the best. And I felt it was time to speak. The National Park Service took information about Harriet Tubman off of their website about the Underground Railroad. How can you write about the Underground Railroad without writing about Harriet Tubman? And it seemed as if, and they eventually restored it, okay? There was a public outcry, and the information was restored on the website. And then this next, with Secretary Hegseth, we felt we needed to speak out.
Now, Professor Black, let's talk about this. In the article, this is what you wrote, and I quote, Tubman was prohibited from enlisting in the U.S. Army, did not stop her from risking her life for the enslaved or for a nation that hasn't yet recognized her rights as a citizen. Can you talk about this in a deeper way? So number one, again, most of us that through my high school, undergraduate school, and graduate school, even today as a journalist, everyone knows that Harriet Tubman was a conductor or was a hero for the Underground Railroad. But few of us that truly understood that her role in the military, and even though you mentioned or you wrote that the nation hadn't yet recognized her rights as citizen. Walk us through what happened exactly, what motivated her, and what does that mean that to recognize or yet to recognize her as a full right citizenship? What do you think of that?
So, most Americans don't know that Harriet Tubman, after making 13 trips on the Underground Railroad to rescue about 70 people going back into slave territory after she liberated herself to liberate 70 other people, that in May of 1862, she went down to Beaufort, South Carolina. So this is very close to where the first shots of the Civil War were fired. Um, and this is definitely slave territory. This is not a border state like Maryland. South Carolina, I like to call it the belly of the beast. She goes down to work as a spy for the U.S. Army. And the arrangements are made for her to work as a spy by the governor of Massachusetts, John Andrew. So she's being recognized right there for her intelligence gathering and her espionage and the way that she operated behind enemy lines on the Underground Railroad. So in South Carolina, she works primarily in the refugee camps downtown in Beaufort, gathering intelligence from enslaved people who have just escaped from Confederate-controlled territory into Union-controlled territory. Now, Harriet Tubman as a woman was not allowed. There was no possibility for her to enlist in the military, right? African Americans are enlisted in the military in late 1862, and that's a one regiment, a few regiments, and then early 1863 when the Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect. Okay, there is a provision in there that allows for the enlistment of Black men, not women, right? Black women, white women are not allowed to enlist in the military in the Civil War. So she's not enlisted as a soldier, but she is working as a spy and a scout. And she's recognized as that by the military commanders. And Tubman planned the Combahee Raid with Colonel James Montgomery. She led a group of men, sort of a ring of spy scouts and pilots, 8 or 9 men, who she recruited. She trained them. She led them. They infiltrated Confederate territory before the raid. They identified enslaved men, again, intelligence and espionage, who were forced to mine the Combahee River, plant mines in the Combahee River. They oversaw, with the U.S. Army commanders, the diffusing of those mines. And this opens the river up to the Combahee River, to the Combahee Raid, to the Union attack. So she risked her life, right? She risked her life going behind enemy lines. She risked her life to open the river for the Union boats to go up the river without being blown up by mines. This is why the U.S. Army General Counsel said in January that Harriet Tubman was a soldier. She could not enlist, but she risked her life, and she showed immense bravery, immense leadership, and sacrifice, self-sacrifice for our nation.
Professor Fields Black, according to your description, there's no denying that the sacrifice and the brevity that Tubman showed during the crucial period of the American history. Now, let's pull something together, talk about the present day our nation. There's no surprise that our nation today, it still continue being presented as a political intersection. We've seen political polarization, we've seen social changes, and also lately, we continue to see how the sitting US president challenge the constitutional power. Now, when I approached this article, again, number one, I have to be honest, I was very much surprised regarding this decision yet to be made. And also, I was very surprised that how this only generated, we'll say, little noises, not a lot. So the question we need to ask, Professor, from your perspective, hypothetically, if Secretary Pete Hegseth decided to strip Tubman from the USNS to something else, what does that signify to our political, what we say, chaos today? And also, why is it that we need to take a stand, continue to protect and honor and respect someone like Harriet Tubman for the greater future of our country? Your thoughts?
Yeah. So I think it would signify, it would be another example, and a pretty high profile example, that the administration intends to try to rewrite history and try to rewrite American history. I have been, okay, so I think that is their effort. And I think the way they look at history is a very regressive way. And it's a way that historians have not, we haven't written history in that way, including just white voices and male voices and Christian voices, right? In decades. So they're seeking to turn back the hands of time and erase many, many, many voices. And these are American voices, right? These are people who fought for this country, who bled for this country, who died for this country, and who should be honored. I think it shows that, okay. Remind me, please, of the second part of your question.
Well, the second part of the question is, why is it important for us to celebrate someone like Harriet Tubman today?
Yeah.
Even though I have to say, if we talk to people on the street, which I do all the time, try to get a general sense of the pulse of our culture or the atmosphere of our political complication. Of course, everyone, again, as I mentioned before, Professor, everyone knows who Harriet Tubman was and what she did, the titles and the respect that she deserved. But when it comes to the value, when it comes to the truth of the history, I have to be honest, many times I got into argument with people and I got into debate with people. It's simply because two words: political polarization or political disinformation. So again, from your perspective, Professor, we're going to get to your book in a second. But again, why is it important for us to understand Harriet Tubman? Why is it important for us to celebrate someone like her today?
Yes, because Harriet Tubman is an American hero. And it's important for us to know that heroes, American heroes, are not just white, Christian, straight men. And Harriet Tubman is just one example. For example, in this class USNS, in these ships, class of John Lewis ships, there's a ship named after Harvey Milk, okay, who was himself a war hero, as well as a legislator, and a member of the LGBTQIA community who was assassinated, right? There's Chief Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Chief Justice Thurgood Marshall. These are people who fought for civil rights. And this is the John Lewis class of ships for civil rights. We need to celebrate all of these people We need to celebrate all of the accomplishments that different kinds of Americans have made. I mean, America is a nation of diverse people, and diversity is really our strength. So to say that we're going to portray ourselves, we're going to think of ourselves as just a nation that is led by white, straight Christian men, I think is doing us a grave disservice, and does not at all represent who we are. It's interesting. I've been on the road now for almost a year and a half with COMBEE, and it never ceases to amaze me that Harriet Tubman is loved by so many people and so many different kinds of people. African Americans, women, white Americans, men, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, you name it. And people who feel like she is not only a historical figure, but they feel like they have a personal relationship with Harriet Tubman, that she guides their life in some ways. I mean, people might say, well, what would Harriet do at this moment? People love Harriet Tubman. And I think that it's a shame to take that away. It's a shame to say that now that we know more about her history, we're actually just gonna erase it and put it, you know, outside because this is the only history we're gonna tell. It doesn't make sense to me.
Professor, our nation just celebrated July the 4th not too long ago. I mean, we know that July the 4th, it's one of the sacred holidays, or it's one of the sacred days that for our nation specifically. I mean, again, today when we talk about our nation, one of the cliches or buzzwords that people tend to throw around is democracy. And when we talk about domestic issues, we love to say we need to value democracy. When we talk about international affairs, we love to say we value democracy. But I want to ask you from your perspective, especially I want to talk about your book, COMBEE, specifically focused on Harriet Tubman. What is your interpretation of democracy? Put ourselves in the shoes of Harriet Tubman, or as a reader, as an author, how do we view the word democracy today? Because I feel like today when we talk about democracy, it's no longer just a motivation or inspiration. It turning into a lame duck excuse, or even a way to shut up the other party to say, oh, I'm doing this for the good of democracy, or I'm protecting this for the greater future of our democracy. But like I said, when I got into debate, when I got into argument with the opposite opinions, it doesn't seem like they understand what they're talking about, but they're only tossing the word democracy to shut me up. So, Professor, from your perspective, what is democracy today for our country, especially from the perspective of Harriet Tubman? Your thoughts?
Yeah. So democracy to me is government for the people and by the people. And that should be all of the people, not a very small, segment of the people. And it's historically, this nation, we have fought to include more and more and more people in what we see as democracy. And it seems that with this Trump administration, the goal is actually the opposite. The goal is to include fewer and fewer and fewer people in democracy. I think that democracy, a key portion of democracy is also participation, right? And so there are rights and responsibilities on both sides. And if you have a government for the people and by the people, then the people actually have to participate in the government. And when you have an election in which half of the Americans didn't vote, is that a democracy? Right? And so if half of the electorate did not vote, it's very hard to have government for the people and by the people. And then by design, you're going to get a very small segment of society that is leading the government. So I think Americans, I'm hoping that this very difficult period that we're going through is going to force us to examine our values. And I think this goes back to Harriet Tubman, because you had people like Tubman and like the U.S. colored troops soldiers, who the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers who conducted the raid, fought in the raid, were part of the USCT, who were willing to risk their lives for freedom. They could have been comfortable. She could have stayed up north. She could have stayed in Canada, right? She didn't have to go back 13 times into the land of bondage, risking her own freedom to bring other people out. She didn't have to go to the South, risking her life for people who were still in bondage. What are we willing to risk?
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
What are we willing to risk for the most vulnerable members of our community? It seems like we're not going to risk anything.
Well,
it seems as if most people today are just thinking about themselves and sacrificing the most vulnerable members of our community, immigrants, right? LGBTQIA, disabled people. Just sacrifice them so that we can. I don't even know for what.
Well, Professor, I have two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about your book. Again, last time you and we had the conversation, again, as you mentioned before, that you've been on the road to promote your book and also talk to the people across the fields regarding Harriet Tubman. And you're right. She's not just a figure that only belonged to the United States of America. Her voices represents the voices or the identities across the spectrums. I always say when I was in undergraduate school, I will never forget how the professor ever first time talked about Harriet Tubman during my history class. One thing that stuck with me until today, and I might not remember the exact phrase, but something he mentioned sounds like, we all have a Harriet Tubman in us, but it is up to us to reignite the fire or not, which I think is so true today. You know, again, as you mentioned before, Professor, it's not just the sacrifice. It's not just the heroic spirit. It's really what are we doing to shape our country or even to modify our own behaviors to make the better society. Now, I want to go on to the next question. Is Professor, let's talk about throughout your research for Harriet Tubman, what kind of characteristics was that figure? So in other words, if we talk about a woman, an African American woman, and back in the days, again, that was a crucial moment for her to make so many, what we say, on the spot decisions. What kind of characteristics are we seeing about Harriet Tubman? And why do you think today we are losing some of the characteristics from Harriet Tubman? Your thoughts?
I think that Harriet Tubman was completely fearless. And she wasn't afraid of her own. She didn't seem to fear anything, including something happening to her. Right? I can't even see it with the things she did and the risks she took, that she was afraid for her own personal safety. The level throughout her life, it seems as if she always thought of other people. She always thought of how she could help other people. Whatever monetary or possessions that she could acquire, she put them into service. Material possessions, she put them into service for other people. So she wasn't looking to acquire. And it's interesting when you read about abolitionists with whom she worked and organized for decades before the war, after the war, and many of them became part of the women's suffrage movement. They were always talking about her and concerned about her because she would just give everything she owned to anybody who needed it. And then she would need help, right? Just completely self-sacrificial. So I think that it's interesting that your professor said we all have an inner Harriet Tubman, because the people I meet, the people who come to my COMBEE book talks, they feel that. They agree with that. And so I think what that means to me is that we all can tap into that place within ourselves where we can think beyond ourselves, right? She was an incredibly spiritual person. So it's as if she didn't believe that she owned anything. It was a higher power. It was God, right? And if she gave it away, she would get more, and she would always have what she needed, which she did, because other people helped her. People helped her, and then she helped other people. If we can get back to that place of wanting to help other people, even if it means we have to sacrifice some of our comforts, right? Some of our stability, some of our our status quo. If we can think about other people and sacrifice for other people, as opposed to sit by and watch other people be sacrificed because we are concerned that we're going to lose what we have. If Tubman had thought that way, she never would have gone back 13 times, right? She never would have gone to South Carolina. She would have stayed up north in Philadelphia or in Canada and sent thoughts and prayers for the people who were still in bondage.
Well, Professor, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Last time you and we had the conversation regarding your amazing book, that was before your book tour. That was before that you set the trip on the road and, to embrace the people who actually appreciated what you wrote, and also, of course, the history of Harriet Tubman. Now, the last question...
Yes. It was before the book won the Pulitzer Prize in history.
There you go. Congratulations, Professor. That is a breaking news that we all want to hear. So the last question, Professor, I want to ask is, after being on the road for so long, and after listening to the voices among the readers, and of course among the scholars and etc., why is it still important today for us to read a book like COMBEE? I mean, again, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about the people that you met. It's really about the hidden stories, the treasure, and the values that we did not know about Harriet Tubman. So again, the last question to you is, why should we read about COMBEE? What is the message that today you want to share after being on the road, after meeting people, after talking to the readers, etc.? Your final thoughts.
My final thoughts. We need to know this history because we need to know that people who were oppressed and enslaved and, forced to labor and bear children against their wills, that they wanted to be free and that they struggled mightily for freedom. And we need to know that there were people who, like Harriet Tubman, and she fits into both camps, right? People who wanted to be free and struggled to be free, and then people who helped those people.
Mm.
So that's three camps. That there were people who helped, right? People who sacrificed, people who risked their own livelihoods, their own freedom, in some cases, their own lives. And so this is an American story of it's a story of the most vulnerable Americans. It's a story of how, these enslaved people on the Combahee River became Americans.
Mm.
And I think it's one of the most, and it's a story of the Civil War, right? This very tumultuous, divided time in American history, and how we won.
Well,
And I think there are forces right now that really need to hear these voices. They need to hear this story, and they need to understand that the best history, the most accurate history, includes all of the voices, not only the names we know, um, not only the white male commanders of the U.S. Army, but also the most vulnerable people who were on the ground and who were actually risking everything to be free.
that's right, Professor. Well, I agree with you 100%. So that's why I would say during the crucial moments, as our nation stands in the crossroads, let's not forget what history has demonstrated to all of us. And the people in the past has shown us the spirit of brevity, tenacity, and most importantly, that democracy is not a cliche. It's something that we all need to understand in a truthful way, not in a distorted, polarized method. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Dr. Edda Black. Again, she's the author of this amazing book. It's called COMBEE. It's about Harriet Tubman and also the Black freedom during the Civil War. Well, Professor Black, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to discover and to explore the lives and the journey of Harriet Tubman. So thank you so much for doing this.